All right. Thank you for joining. Whether you're tuning in live or joining us via recording, we are excited to join you in this dialogue on the private sector and its relationships to sustainability and youth engagement. Iman has a wonderful presentation to share with you in just a few minutes, but first I wanted to share a bit of background. As I shared in the chat, my name is Emma, and I am the Youth for Nature private sector lead. Youth for Nature is a by youth for youth international nonprofit organization that educates, equips, and establishes youth as leaders on system-wide solutions for the nature and climate crises that are rooted in traditional and scientific knowledge and grounded in intergenerational justice. And we do this through capacity building, knowledge sharing, and storytelling programs. The Private Sector Task Force within Youth for Nature fosters discussion and positive dialogue around best practices for firms and businesses in the private sector. We are focused on science-based and justice-oriented solutions to the climate and biodiversity crises through financing and process changes. I am thrilled to introduce Iman, who has done an incredible job this summer researching the ways that youth can make a positive difference in the world of private sector sustainability. Iman?
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. Okay. Can everyone see that? Okay, perfect. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking your time to join the Private Sector Toolkit launch and dialogue event. My name's Iman Lalani, and I've been interning with Youth for Nature since the beginning of May to help create this toolkit. So Youth for Nature's aim in creating this toolkit on the private sector was so that it can be used as a resource that educates youth on the environmental impacts of the private sector, in particular, its impact on nature and climate. So as we're also aware that the private sector invokes feelings of worry and concern from many of us, we made sure that our toolkit also worked to empower youth to be a part of the solution by providing ideas for practical ways that we can all help reduce the environmental impacts of the private sector. So in order to gauge how much knowledge youth feel that they have regarding the environmental impacts of the private sector, as well as their feelings towards the issue, we decided to conduct a survey. So our survey received 42 responses from individuals aged 18 to 35, with most of the respondents being between the ages of 18 to 22. And these responses also came from individuals located in 5 of Youth for Nature's working regions. So these included Africa, Asia and the Pacific, Europe and Central Asia, Latin America and the Caribbean, North America and West Asia. So the results of our survey were very interesting and revealed that only 7% of youth felt informed regarding the environmental impacts of the private sector. Only 17% felt that they had a solid understanding of greenwashing. 93% felt that the private sector invokes feelings of concern or worry for them. However, only 7% of youth reported that their purchases were influenced by their awareness of the private sector's environmental impact, with most people, 88.4%, believing that the private sector rather than individual behavior is responsible for ensuring sustainability. So we took this information and decided to organize the toolkit into 4 thematic areas. So these are manufacturing, agriculture and food systems, the energy transition, and social justice. So within each of these thematic areas, we present statistics, the environmental problems they pose, what you can do to help ameliorate these problems, and then the role of the private sector is playing in tackling these issues. And we then decided to end the toolkit with advice from youth professionals that have experience working to improve the sustainability of the private sector. So now I'm just going to briefly walk us through the 4 thematic areas and what you can expect to find in each of these sections in the toolkit. So in the manufacturing section of the toolkit, we identify and discuss the key environmental problems of burning fossil fuels, the way in which natural resources are sourced, the practice of building factories, and the leakage of hazardous materials that occurs during the manufacturing process. To improve these issues, we recommend that youth look out for signs of greenwashing, which refers to when companies mislead their customers into believing that they are concerned about the environmental impact, when in reality, their operations are just contributing to environmental degradation. We also discuss ways in which youth can improve their shopping habits and demand change from corporations that are responsible for these issues. In our agriculture and food systems section, the key issues we discuss are the use of pesticides and fertilizers in food production, deforestation, farming mechanization and transportation, the use of concentrated animal feeding operations, as well as waste production. We then provide ideas for how youth can reduce or stop their meat and fish consumption, cut down on their food wastage, and switch to purchasing locally produced and seasonal foods. In the energy transition section of the toolkit, we cover problems associated with the use and sourcing of oil and gas, coal, tidal, wind, nuclear, and hydroelectric energy. We then suggest ways in which youth can reduce their energy usage at home, choose more environmentally friendly forms of transportation, and demand that companies change and increase their transparency. In our final section on social justice, we decided to organize it a little bit differently. So we provide 3 environmental justice case studies, one with a focus on manufacturing, one with a focus on agriculture and food systems, and one with a focus on the energy transition. So each case study details an example of an environmental injustice that has occurred and details how youth were able to help tackle the issue. So, for example, one of the case studies that we featured in this toolkit was on eutrophication of Western Lake Erie. So, as a result of agricultural pollution, by 2019, Lake Erie's algal bloom had expanded to over 620 square miles. So this posed significant threats to both public health and aquatic life. The most impacted communities were those that were low income and communities of color. Despite several complaints being filed about the ecosystem's degradation for over 20 years, local officials merely responded with loose promises to eventually upgrade the water treatment facility. In response, Toledo's youth and citizens were able to gather 10,500 signatures and develop the Lake Erie Bill of Rights, which gave Lake Erie the right to exist, flourish, and naturally evolve, and provide citizens with a right to a clean and healthy environment. So this Bill of Rights led to the amendment of Toledo's municipal charter to recognize the river's rights and empower its citizens to sue on its behalf, on behalf of the lake. Following this, the movement was met with significant backlash from British Petroleum amongst other corporate entities, which eventually caused the bill to be overturned. Despite this unfortunate outcome, the Lake Erie Bill of Rights case gained international attention and was the first law in the US to acknowledge that ecosystems deserve rights. It's helped to spearhead the Rights for Nature or environmental personhood movement, which aims to grant ecosystems and animals intrinsic protection from pollution, amongst other harms, demonstrating the power that the youth have when we all come together to fight something meaningful. So that basically sums up what you can expect to find in our toolkit. And I do hope that after this event, you do give it a read or check it out. But before we move on to our dialogue discussion section of the event, if anyone has any questions about the toolkit that they would like to ask, that would be great. My favorite part of creating the toolkit, I would definitely say researching the case studies. As you'll see with the other two, just knowing that people of my age or younger were able to make such a difference was definitely inspiring to read about and write about. Also, as I mentioned, we have an advice section at the end of the toolkit from youth professionals. So having those interactions with youth professionals and learning about their stories was also my favorite part of this process. Was there anything that really stood out to me? I would say, I honestly think it's really about the small things. I think at the end of the day, a lot of us, or me personally, I feel quite overwhelmed when I think about the climate or nature issue. And so creating this document that kind of wrote down just the small changes like I or all of us can make in our lives definitely stood out to me, because sometimes I feel like we undermine the importance of individual action. Did you find any differences across the regions in the involvement of young people? I would say, from having done my research, I do think that there is a bias and there is more like information published online about youth in the West and the like work that they've done towards this issue. So it definitely did take a little bit more digging to find. Like one of the case studies, my example was a girl from Kenya and her work in Mombasa to help provide children with solar backpacks, so that, in the day whilst they went to school, their backpacks were like generating power with the solar energy. And so that when they came home, they were able to use that instead of kerosene lamps, I guess, to continue their homework. So even though I was able to find case studies like that, I was surprised how much harder it was to find those stories. What thematic area do I feel has the most potential for positive change? These are hard questions. I would say the energy transition. I think at the moment, we know that there's really no good in continuing to invest in oil and gas. And the more and more research that comes out about nuclear power and its potential, as well as the increasing feasibility of things like solar and wind power, I do think that section probably has the most area of potential for positive change, because also once we make that transition to renewables or nuclear power, that has a knock-on effect on our agriculture and also on manufacturing. Yeah. Okay, well, I guess we can move over to the dialogue and discussion section of the event. Basically, we have 3 questions that we have prepared for the event. And if you have something that you'd like to say or contribute, please put your hand up and unmute yourself to speak. And if you could put your cameras on, that would also be great to facilitate discussion. So, yeah. So our first question of our dialogue session is, what do you think the biggest challenges are preventing sustainability in the private sector? Yes, Emma?
I think one of the biggest challenges that I've seen is the fact that the private sector is fueled by profit and by the capitalist system that we live in. So it seems like many corporations get stuck in a trap, whether they want to be sustainable or not. They get stuck in this trap of trying to maximize profits for their shareholders and for the people that work in the company. And it can be really hard to, it seems, encourage companies to focus more on people and planet and the positive impact that they could be having in the world in those areas, because a lot of the time they get sort of stuck in the rat race, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, Julia?
Yeah, to me, another challenge that sometimes people forget is are all the legal barriers and how the government is done around the private sector. So sometimes private sectors and experts, they have all the expertise. Honestly, some companies and SMEs truly have experts within their rank. They know very well how to work on the ground, how to implement solutions, how to work at best. But they have these barriers of legal framework that makes them not be able to have the best solutions for the planet, the most sustainable solutions, because they have to fit some criteria, they have to fit some legal obligations that make them that way and make them not able to work. And I've been working, and when I did my studies and make my master thesis, I was working with a case of an African country and company that wanted to not import pesticides from Europe, which was a very bad for carbon, for biodiversity, but they had to import these pesticides, otherwise they will not be able to sell the flour in Europe and within the European Union, because it had to fit some criteria in agriculture. And it's the same in France. We have the same issue that you have to go some ways and to use some pesticides, to use some seeds, specific seeds that are very bad for the environment. Otherwise, you are not able to sell. So there are all these money issues and all these legal issues as well.
Ian?
Yeah, thank you, Iman. And I think also I was looking at it more in this way that many of the private sector actually provides, businesses and day-to-day things that people use. And then in a way, because many of our livelihoods or sometimes the things that we use around the world actually depends on private sector. It's not really giving them that push that they need to think about sustainability that much. So I'm also thinking that this is way more like it has a lot to do with consumption and what is required, and also in for example, it could be as simple as businesses trying not to use plastic, for example, in the manufacturing industry, not using plastic or stuff to stop waste. But they wouldn't do that because at the end of the day, whether they do this or not, people still depend on a lot of the things that are coming from the private sector. So I think this might be a lot of, this might contribute to a lot of things that is slowing down the private sector to actually push sustainability or bring sustainability into their businesses, because I think whether they do this or not, most of the products, we've not really had a lot of alternatives to the products that are coming from the private sector that people can switch into and say, oh, no, we are not going to be using this product unless you do this, unless you contribute to this sustainability, unless you stop your waste or something. So I think improving a lot of alternatives or bringing in alternatives to some of the things that has contributed to, environmental degradation within the private sector could actually move us forward when it comes to sustainability. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like because it's the harder route to make the sustainable purchase, like a lot of people are not aware, or it's like they don't make that effort. And I would also say the amount of greenwashing that we see is only increasing. And I do feel like if I wasn't studying what I was studying, or had the knowledge that I have because of the field I'm going into, I wouldn't be aware of what greenwashing was or what to look out for. And so I definitely feel like not just youth, but a lot of people end up believing, corporation statements when they talk about the progress they're making in terms of sustainability. And because there's not that much transparency, and it's hard to follow up, and we kind of have this trust in a lot of corporations, we end up just believing it and continuing to purchase from them, and no real changes actually made. Emma, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that because it reminded me not only is there a lack of transparency that makes it hard for consumers, but I feel like a lack of transparency in the value chain, in the supply chain, in understanding scope 3 emissions, that all can make it difficult on corporations as well. And a lot of the time they'll have to hire an external consultant to understand how to make decarbonization goals, how to create sustainable products, how to go along their supply chain and find vendors that are actually contributing to less harm and more benefit across the supply chain through their products and their services. So to me, that would be another challenge. Is I think the lack of transparency in corporations sometimes comes down to a lack of understanding or lack of resources to combat these challenges. And I've seen a change, though, in the past 5-ish years where there's more resources available. There are more people fighting these issues, fighting climate change and fighting biodiversity loss. I've seen a huge shift in recognizing the value of that and making sure that companies have the resources they need, and the people who are purchasing from these companies or services actually do care and will continue to push them to promote sustainability.
Yeah, definitely. And on your point about, like, I guess not having that expertise, like even when it comes to like the definition of like sustainability itself, it's so widely debated that it makes it easy for companies to like usually throw it around or just use it as a buzzword in their advertisements. And so yeah, it really is. There's a lot of challenges, as we can see. Does anyone else have anything they want to share, or would you like to move on to the next question? Okay. I guess we'll move on to the next question. So this one's a bit more personal. So what emotions do you feel come up around sustainability in the private sector for you? I can definitely start by saying, like, even when researching for this toolkit, like it's hard not to feel overwhelmed or feel like, oh my God, I'm just like one small person trying to like make change, like in, make such significant change. There's also that factor of like, we kind of feel like, we're running out of time, or things are only getting worse, like it's so much quicker. So definitely, like, also, as youth, I feel like we have that worry about, what is the world going to look like 20 years from now, 30 years from now, that kind of thing. So it's definitely something that's like brings up like feelings of worry for me. But at the same time, learning from like our interviewees and like knowing that the small changes I can try and like make in my own life at least gives me some sort of hope. And like hearing about other youth stories is definitely very inspiring. So, I mean, that's why I'm going into what I'm going into. And so hopefully I can use that, like, I guess, worry or feeling of overwhelmed and channel it into something good at least. Yes, Emma.
I wanted to share that while Iman, Julie, and I, and Aloysian are all members of Youth for Nature's Private Sector Task Force, and we're all engaged in this fishbowl discussion, I feel like others can also share their insights about these questions, and especially personal questions like this, like what emotions do you feel? I would love to continue this discussion online, on our Twitter page, on our Instagram page, because we did get so many responses in the survey and in our interviews about both the like overwhelm and concern that people feel about sustainability in the private sector. But as you were sharing, Aman, it seems like the more you know about these issues and the solutions that are available, the more hope you can feel, because there really are so many young people doing really incredible things in this space. And of course, more senior people, older people, and those with more experience who are also pushing from the top down, which is really incredible to see. So I feel lucky to be in this space and have the opportunity to see all these solutions that are available. And I know Iman did a fantastic job pulling some of them into the toolkit as well. So I really feel a lot of hope and excitement, because I think there's a lot of potential, especially in the private sector, sometimes when government lags behind because of bureaucracy or political issues, the private sector we know they have the funding and they have the corporate know-how to push ahead and really create trailblazing pathways towards sustainability across the world. And a lot of the time, they also have a global footprint as well. We know huge multinational corporations have the potential to make change, not just in their home country, but in other regions as well. So that's what I'm excited about.
Yeah, does anyone else want to share?
I love what Emma said. That's truly how I feel as well. But I also have very, very mixed feelings around sustainability in the private sector, because sometimes it's so frustrating to know that there's an issue, there is an issue, it's very big, and people are aware, but they're just saying, okay, cut down your Wi-Fi when you're not home, as if the issue was not elsewhere, and the answer to the problem would not be in the private sector, because it's not only about trying to put down the private sector, but to work with them and to create something new and something better for the planet. And I feel sometimes, for instance, in France last week, we had the heat wave, and the government and big companies just said, "Oh, that's fine. We just need to put more AC." No, it's not. It's not about that. It's more about trying to find together a solution. Solutions are here. We have multiple solutions that should and can be applied, and then we can try to all together go to sustainability. And sometimes I feel like the word itself, sustainability, doesn't have the same strength and the same flavor than it should have. And it's very, very not strong, because so many companies started to greenwash around that word. So I feel like sometimes it's just doesn't feel like it should feel.
Yeah, and I think I want to add to what Julia and Emma already said, because everything they said about these feelings are actually true for me. And I think also most times this feeling also comes because, we as young people, we are always driving for actions. And then somehow we feel maybe there are ways that, private sector can actually integrate sustainability into their business practices than what they do now. Sometimes we also see that there are ways that they can commit to actions to make a difference, much more than what they are actually doing right now when it comes to creating more business models that are environmental friendly, and not just saying, we just want to live with the mess that has already been created, but how do we change that into something better? And of course, designing products and services in a different way that is helpful for the environment. And I think they can't do this alone. They also need to know that they need to collaborate both locally and globally to achieve this sustainability. So I think we young people thinking about all of these things, especially for myself, when I think about there's so much more that can be done than what is done now, it brings this overwhelming feeling that, oh my God, is it only we that are seeing these things, that are seeing the ways that things can work better, or they just don't want to do it? For example, there's what Julia was saying about the heat wave and talking about AC. Why not see that as an opportunity to change products, change services to be environmental friendly, collaborate on the local and global perspective of people, and see the ways in which change can come, not just by adapting, but also trying our best to mitigate these problems. I think this is one of the areas that actually cause a lot of overwhelming thought to me, and also the responses that comes when we see all of this climate changing. It brings a lot of overwhelming feeling to young people in this space. It's things are not going well, but we are not also hearing the responses that we think it's helpful for the environment or helpful for we people.
Yeah, definitely. Governments and corporations are still very much taking a business as usual approach, which is the problem, I guess. But I discussed this in the toolkit a little bit, but the idea of the circular economy, for example, is definitely one of those solutions that kind of, I'm that sounds amazing. That gives me that little bit of hope. But also, as we know, corporations and governments don't really tend to change how they operate unless like it's really demanded by a lot of people. And so I guess that's also where we come into play. So yeah. Well, thank you guys all for sharing on that question. Are we ready to move on to our last one? Or does anyone have any final thought? Okay, cool. So the last question is, what role do you think the youth has in working towards achieving sustainability in the private sector? I think we touched on it a little bit already, but does anyone have anything more to share?
If I can go ahead, I agree that we kind of discussed this a bit with the previous questions, but honestly, I feel like young people have this opportunity throughout their energy to just call out all the private sector, asking for not acknowledge, but asking them for accountability. Sorry, and trying to go for something else with all the protests. Also, young people working in companies can try to make things change, can bring some new ideas, can bring all the future with them together, actually, and all this vision that they have and that should be applied. And at the same time, young people may also have more energy in fighting big corporations, because maybe other people might be already tired with all the 10, 20 years ago, they were already saying the same thing, trying to do the same social justice, environmental justice issues. So I feel like young people have this big opportunity and should take that role with the support of everyone, all groups and communities.
Yeah, definitely. And Christabel in the chat, she said, like, by starting to live sustainable as ourselves and leading by example, which is another good point. Emma?
Yeah, just tying in what Julia and Aloash and others have said, I think that by building community and working together, we have a really unique opportunity as young people, because we have social media and we have the internet. We have ways of connecting that other generations couldn't even imagine before. I mean, we're all connecting on this webinar from all over the world. And we met each other virtually, which I think is a really incredible way to communicate issues and understand stories and where people are coming from. And by building those stories, by building insights, and by building solutions, we can all come to greater understandings of the issues and solutions for moving forward and creating positive impact. So while I would hesitate to say that it's youth's responsibility to achieve sustainability in the private sector, because it really is the responsibility of the older generations to clean up the mess that they created. I hate it when they push the mess down to us and say it's up to us to fix it. But I really do think that we have some of the tools and solutions. Like Julia said in the chat, we have strong and powerful tools right in front of us to use for the good. And we have the energy to do it. And to me, that's a really powerful thing. And if we want to, we can really change the way that the private sector and the corporate economic model works, which is really exciting to me.
Yeah, definitely. And I would also say that, like, I feel like not all youth, but a lot of youth, I guess, don't really choose to educate themselves on the issue, whether that's because it seems too daunting or not, like, oh, this is not our problem or that kind of thing. But I would definitely say, like, seeking out, that knowledge and not being ignorant to it is definitely also very important. I guess, like, being aware is the first step to even making any change. So yeah, that's something I would add. Does anyone else have any more thoughts on this? Yeah.
If I could just jump onto what you just said, it reminded me so much of the interviews you conducted with people in the toolkit itself. Like, some of the advice spoke directly to that, about the solutions that are available to people and what you can do right now, instead of being overwhelmed by the magnitude of the climate crisis, the magnitude of the sustainability crisis. There are small first steps that you can take and ways to maintain positive that I think, Iman, you captured perfectly in the toolkit. And it's a great way to zero in on tiny first steps. And try a first step. If you like it, share it with your friends, share it with your networks, see if you can educate, empower other people, instead of being overwhelmed by the enormity of these crises. There are small things that we can all do every day, and maybe small goals we can have each year to continue pushing towards sustainability.
Yes, yeah. Well, thank you guys all for sharing. If anyone has any last thoughts, put your hand up or let me know in the chat. But I also would like to thank Emma, Julia, and Sam for all your help throughout these last 2 months in creating the toolkit, and Rachel as well for everything. Rachel just shared a quote. I'll read it out. Why not? The responsibility to save and protect our planet for ourselves and future generations is not a burden. It's a blessing. And I believe we were chosen for this job because we are the ones who can make it happen. I think that's a great way to end this event. Thank you for sharing, Rachel. Well, I just want to say, thank you to everybody for all your valuable and interesting insights throughout this discussion. It was really great to connect with all of you. With that, the toolkit is now live on our website, and we're thrilled to give you the opportunity to learn from these solutions and share them with your networks. Before all you guys leave, I would also really appreciate if you could fill out our feedback form, which is posted on the slide. But yeah, thank you guys again so much for joining and taking your time.